All right, so I want to try something with you guys. Might seem a little bit weird, but entertain me, will you? Okay, so for starters, I want you to close your eyes and just relax for a second. All right, here we go. Eyes closed. All right. 10-inch paper pulp woofer. I know, we're already off to a great start with just that. Now, remove the dust cap, and why the heck not? Stuff a soft dome tweeter smack dab in the middle of the woofer. Have that pictured in your head? That's right, concentric design. And for the love of all things holy, we have a paper cone woofer and a soft dome tweeter, and we're not even done yet, so keep your eyes closed. Now, instead of a conventional half-roll rubber surround for the paper cone woofer, we find an old-fashioned corrugated surround. And with your eyes still closed, try to imagine a tastefully sculpted matte black baffle, and of course, none other than a walnut cabinet that surrounds the rest of the speaker's enclosure. All right, open your eyes. And you guys tell me, is my house being bugged? I think my house is being bugged. And with a warm welcome back to New Record Day, let's find out why Andrew Jones probably, for sure, bugged my house. You know, the ELAC debut, as far as I am concerned, having lived through it, changed the budget audiophile game altogether. And when the Unify came out, it seemed to me that anyone getting into hi-fi, regardless of their budget, now had access to something that would forever change their perspective on what great sounding loudspeakers are supposed to sound like. When Andrew joined MoFi Electronics, I was eager as to what he would come up with in this new chapter of his life and his design work. The day that the SourcePoint 10 came out, it took me all about 3 seconds to quickly decide that given the basic recipe of what made this speaker a reality, this, without question, at least on paper, sounded to me like it would be the perfect boxed speaker as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, I am an open baffle guy, and I'll never stop trying to convince Andrew to take a crack at that kind of a loudspeaker. You guys can help me out in the comment section if you want, but back here on planet Earth, where that most likely will never ever happen, every single thing about the SourcePoint 10s just seemed perfect as far as I am concerned. So, without wasting a ton of time, knowing the speaker's been out for quite a while and already pretty well covered, let's just breeze past all the boring specs and get to what you guys really want. For those who want to skip straight to the sound clips, measurements, or even listening impressions, I do have the review chaptered out, so feel free to do that as well. All right, you guys ready? Let's go. Getting straight to the point, the SourcePoint 10 has been one of those speakers that's pretty easy to review. At no point in any of my listening sessions did I identify a problem that should have been solved, and at no point did I discover something that might hurt Mr. Jones' feelings, as if that was even possible.
What, are you gonna cry now? Come on, cry, baby, cry for me. Come on, cry.
But you know what? If, and I mean if, there were any disclaimers or perhaps wish list items that I could conjure up in good faith that perhaps MoFi is collecting feedback, I only have one. And you know what? The funny thing is, because it's taken me so dang long to review the speaker, the reality is it seems that they already got the memo, and with the brand new SourcePoint 888s, it appears we have deeper bass available for those who want the point source sound, but also want to remodel a few walls at the exact same time. So, you might have guessed, I do wish that the SourcePoint 10s hit just a little bit lower in my room, but I must confess that in the same breath, and this is the truth, I never ran these speakers with subwoofers, and while I could have, I've got plenty of subs around, these weren't lacking enough bass for me to actually do something about it. So, in a nutshell, for those who want deeper bass, well, there you go. Try the 888s when they're available and have fun. Alrighty. In my room, with the speakers, let's say 2 feet away from the walls, hitting even as low as 30 hertz was possible, but it also might come with sacrifices and trade-offs that some of you won't be willing to make. 4 feet into the room, I was still able to get bass into the 30s, and to be frank, one of the more linear responses that I have ever seen in this room, or any room for that matter. Now, at 8 feet into the room, which is where I ended up listening to them for the majority of this review, the bass drops off around 46 hertz. And I know it's not as linear at 8 feet as it was at 4 feet, so why the heck did I even bother? Well, it's because I'm a lunatic, also known as an audiophile. Anyhow, this gives an idea of the mileage here, and while I understand a lot of folks won't have 8 feet of real estate to give up for a pair of speakers, my gut tells me that most audiophiles who sit down to listen to these will probably land on the same page as me, which is this. You know, it would be nice if these dug a little deeper, but heck, I'm just going to sit here and keep listening because, well, let's talk about that. Climbing up from deeper bass, the mid bass on the Source Point 10s sounds textured with a decent helping of heft and weight, giving the speakers a robust and powerful sound. The sound is very textured and it offers a lot of details in that particular bandwidth. Kick drums sound punchy and tight, uprights sound robust, and also colorful, but in a good way, and tom-toms sound incredibly satisfying as well. Anything from Supertramp or The Who is a blast to listen to on these speakers, and for me, with how big and dynamic they sound, I think starting parties with the Source Point 10s is probably not only a great idea, but something that they were born to do. I recently had my brother come out for a visit to listen to a number of speakers, including the Source Point 10s. Both my brother and I loved what the 10s did in the sound shed, and both found them to be top contenders against any of the speakers that I have on hand. Throughout the day, we tried a number of different tracks, speaker positions, and even tried stuffing the ports on the Source Point 10s, because why not? Just to have a listen. And indeed, for some folks, they might like how it tightens up the bass even more, but the need for a subwoofer at that point will most likely become more of a priority. As for the heart of midrange, or being specific vocal territory, or even more specific male vocals, I don't know if I have ever heard a box speaker that I have liked more in how these present male vocals. It's a pretty big deal. Perhaps it's the paper cone woofer. Perhaps it's the way the cabinet is designed. Perhaps it's the interesting front baffle and all of these interesting designs that Andrew came up with. Or maybe it's just my imagination, but I am going to call it as I hear it. I am addicted to the texture heard from these speakers when it comes to the heart of midrange. There is something about how real and bold the human voice sounds that for me just draws me in. And in those moments, I couldn't care less about anything above or below that particular bandwidth because it just sounds so right. Now, what about everything else in the mid-range outside of vocals? Well, anything acoustic, whether it's a cello or an acoustic guitar, sounds just as intoxicating as far as I'm concerned. There is something to be said about how notes resonate inside the recorded instrument and how the Source Point 10s extract that resonance, and it showcases it in such a beautiful sounding way. Velvety and smooth are words that come to mind, and even more, the body of instruments is believable. Not thin, Not chunky, not boxy, not exaggerated, just right and real sounding. So yeah, very natural, convincing, and textured mid-range is what I heard when making my way through my Audiophile playlist. Now, what about this tweeter? What about top end and treble extension? I know that Aaron, shout out to Aaron from Aaron's Audio Corner, mentioned how much he liked the Source Point 8s over the 10s because the 8s do appear to be a little more linear in their top end response, but without having spent any time with the Source Point 8s, my gut tells me that the Source Point 10s are closer to the dragon that I am chasing. With concentric drivers, you really don't want to listen to those speakers pointing right at your ears, and with some experimentation, I like these guys pointing closer to my shoulders, and in this configuration, I didn't find these to be bright with any material that I threw at the 10s, and if anything, at times I wish I had a little bit more air and top-end fluffy stuff that many audiophiles seem to crave. That's not to say that these sound warm. They do not. It just means that I might be realizing that a slight lift in the top end is something that I tend to like more than something that is perfectly neutral or linear. While the measurements do show a minor rise in the 10s after 3K, it's gradual and without beating a dead horse. I just don't find these to be a bright or forward-sounding speaker at all. As far as I'm concerned, the top end is about as perfect as I have ever heard or I would hope to hear out of a pair of loudspeakers. So while I don't find the Source Point 10s to be bright or forward-sounding speakers, I felt these tend to give the mid-row experience, and most of the music concentration seems to sit in the midfield of the stage. Listening to something like Missing Pieces by Audiophiles, I can't say that name. I'm just going to blow right past that. This track throws things around the room in the most impossible ways and is my go-to track for depth and width. With the 10s, all the nuggets of information are in their right places and it's easy to track. But when I've swapped the 10s for something like the Caledons or even my Encores, I did notice that some of those nuggets do indeed sound a little bit deeper and even wider in the soundstage. While I'm not smart enough to figure out why this is, I just make the comment that while the Source Point 10s do image very well, like incredibly well, and sound incredibly intoxicating with their mid-range tone, they might not be best in class when it comes to the deepest and widest stage on planet Earth. Oh, and yes, this also answers the question that I joked about earlier with having these 8 feet into the room. At 4 feet, while the tone and linear nature of the speakers was technically better than where I ended up landing with these speakers, I just felt like I needed them to open up as much as possible, and having them deep into the room is how I got that sound that I was searching for, including the deepest stage that the Source Point 10s were going to offer in my room. So yeah, I'm still a lunatic, but at least you now have a little bit more context as to why. I typically don't spend time chaptering out dynamics in a loudspeaker, but with the Source Point 10s, I felt compelled. Now I'll say this, these are a pretty big speaker, and one would most likely assume that because they are big, they offer a big sound, and here is the thing, they do. Now, I know that's not all that exciting, but let me express this in a more meaningful way. With a concentric driver, where the woofer and tweeter are working as one, as a true point source, one issue that can make a mess of things is when it comes to a lot of woofer movement and added distortion. Now, I have pushed these speakers to the point where I feel uncomfortable, and to this day, I can't seem to find a ceiling in these things, which sort of blows my mind. It really is one of those speakers that you just can't seem to break the dang things, and the more that you turn them up, the more open and engaging they seem to sound. At the same time, given their higher sensitivity, this dynamic and open sound also applies when listening at low levels, which a lot of you guys are always asking me about. So yeah, If a dynamic speaker that would be amazing for parties is high on your priority list, these won't disappoint. And for those who want a dynamic speaker while watching Matlock and knitting by the fire with Andrew, well, again, lucky day for you, good sir. In the event where you decide to pull the trigger on these speakers, I do recommend picking up a pair of the stands as well. The footprint of the speaker is rather large, and I think that for the sake of stability, the 4-leg wide platform stands is certainly a smart purchase. Another reason why I like these stands is they are large enough to accommodate the speakers when setting them on their side. And while it might look funny, I strongly suggest that you give this a whirl, as in my room with my low-sitting chair, I actually prefer these in this orientation. Don't worry, with a concentric driver, you won't be jacking anything up in terms of sound, so outside of it looking a little bit odd, you might discover that they perform a little bit more to your liking when vertical. To my ears, I hear a little bit more body and weight, and I hear minor differences with how high things are scattered, which ended up being fun for soundtracks and material with deep and wide soundstage. All right, grab those headphones and let's give these speakers a listen. All the clips are recorded using my Earthworks QTC40s and Zoom F8N. In this demonstration, I'll play the reference track and then the source point 10s and let you decide whether or not you hear much of a deviation from the original recording. So please leave your comments down below, and away we go.
Engineer, where are you headed? Engineer, where are you headed?
No hubiera pensado que yo me iba a enamorar, jamás no quería saber nada más, nunca más. No hubiera pensado que yo me iba a enamorar, jamás no quería saber nada más, nunca más.
Yeah, those clips sound really good. And of course, as good as a job as I might have done with capturing these speakers, you still aren't hearing key aspects of how they stage in the room, so keep that in mind. At any rate, I don't hear much of a deviation from the reference signal, and to me, the source point 10s are one of my favorite speakers that I have ever recorded, as they just sound right to my ears, both in the recording and, of course, in the room. All right, for starters, since the speaker has been out for a while and it has been measured by a couple of different publications, this gave me a target to aim for with my own measurements. While I didn't quite land on the exact same data as Aaron from Aaron's Audio Corner, I did notice that my shots did line up pretty close to what John Atkinson posted in the Stereophile review. Either way, the source point 10 appears to be quite linear in its response. especially up to the top end extension and the treble territory. Taking a look at this first measurement, which is Andrew's reference point or 10 degrees off axis, we can see as close to a straight line as I think I have ever seen from 200 hertz all the way up to 1500 hertz. Now, because my measurement is gated, that's about a 6 millisecond gated window, it's difficult to say if this line is truly as smooth as it appears, but if we're talking about the big picture here, right? This all looks very good and quite promising. Now, from 1500 and up, there are some small wiggles that we see in the response, and when overlaying my response to Atkinson's, I could see similar, if not the same trends in these ripples, which knew that I was at least on target with my own measurements. Now, none of these deviations, at least based on my experience, are egregious or anything to freak out about. To be clear, any of these small little ripples are within a couple of decibels, and none of them seem to occupy large enough of the bandwidth to worry about. So let's just get straight to the point that the source point seems to be quite linear indeed. One thing that both John and Aaron mention, and I can see it to a small extent, is there does seem to be a very slight trend moving up in the higher frequencies past 3K. But alas, we are still talking about a very minor rise in the bandwidth and nothing that I think points to a problem that I believe needs to be solved. As I mentioned in my listening impressions, that listening to a concentric driver on axis is a no-no. So for me, when listening to these at or around my shoulders, I never once felt that the top end of the 10s was overly bright or fatiguing. As for the horizontal response, the fall-away and tight grouping from 0 to 40 degrees and 10-degree increments all look about as good as I have ever seen, with red pointing on axis, orange at 10, yellow at 20, green at 30, and blue at 40 degrees off axis. The point source 10 shows a natural and tight fall-away on the horizontal plane. As for the vertical, well, it's just as good as the horizontal, if not better. At no point in this response did I see a sag near the crossover point, no phase-related or cancellation issues, or anything else that would suggest that when listening to the source point 10s, regardless of where you are listening, that you will hear any issues or problems coming from this speaker. As I have mentioned a number of times on this channel, when the horizontal and vertical response of a loudspeaker behaves like this, the overall room response, also known as the power response, is very predictable, and it makes it very easy for me to say to anyone who is willing to listen to me that this speaker should perform well in just about any of your rooms, within reason. Last but not least, the impedance plot looks fine with both ends of the audio spectrum being balanced. The lowest point of the plot shows 6.4 ohms, which is within 80% of the nominal impedance. So yeah, this is indeed an 8 ohm speaker, and going by experience, it's also very easy to drive. I tried the speakers with amps ranging from 15 watts and up, and not once did I have a hard time getting these speakers to wake up. One particular combo that I loved was when pairing these with the brand new Ager 2s from Shit Audio, but that's for another video. As most of you guys know, I love open baffle speakers, but at the same time, I can appreciate a well-engineered and great-sounding box speaker just as much as the next audiophile or hi-fi enthusiast. As for the Source Point 10s, they are exactly that, and to an extent, even more. Maybe Andrew Jones did indeed bug my house, because having followed all of his work very closely over the last decade as I've been reviewing all of this hi-fi stuff, it has been such a pleasure to see Andrew spend time with a paper cone driver along with a tried and true soft dome tweeter. The Source Point 10s will go down in history as one of the speakers that I've enjoyed more than most, and obviously comes with the highest recommendation that NRD can offer. And with that, I will see you Andrew Jones loving audiophiles in the next video. I love these things. They sound great. The human voice on these is ridiculous. And that's the truth. Good job, Andrew. Make an open baffle speaker. You've got my house bugged. Andrew, make an open baffle speaker.